Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Lisa Mitchell, and I'm currently an assistant professor in the School of Education at St. Thomas University, which is a small undergraduate university located in Fredericton, New Brunswick, on the east coast of Canada. I'm really thrilled that I was asked to do this virtual presentation for BIRA. I'm still sort of disappointed that I'm not able to actually visit the conference in person this year, but I know that all of us are being super flexible and adapting and sort of learning a difficult way through COVID-19 and our experiences that research doesn't always go how we want it to go. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to actually talk about my work and perhaps create some connections with those of you who are watching at home or from your offices. The presentation today focuses on content from two different areas. It is both arts-based in nature, so if that's something that appeals to you, you may find something interesting there. And it's also about teacher education and the nature of collaboration in universities as well. I'm hoping that you will find something in this presentation that really speaks to you in those two areas. So let's do this together, collaborative teaching and learning in an arts-informed education classroom. In terms of who was involved in the project, I just wanted to mention one thing before I get started. We have a couple of images up here on the screen. Obviously, that's me on the left of the slide, Dr. Lisa Mitchell. I'm a teacher educator. I've been a certified teacher for over 17 years now, and for the last 10, I've been working with new teacher candidates as they complete their teacher training in Canadian universities. And on the right side of the slide, you'll see Ms. Carrie Kennedy, who was actually one of my teacher candidate students in a Bachelor of Education teacher education program in Canada. And although she's not actually presenting with me today, her voice nonetheless is very present in this presentation. And so I wanted to make sure that her presence in the work is really acknowledged. I have a background, like I said, as a teacher, but I'm also an artist. I'm really interested in the integrated arts, so how drama, film, dance, literature, and music can work together to create learning experiences. And I do have a background as a trained music educator. And then Carrie is, in addition to being a new teacher now, is also an independent filmmaker. And so that kind of sets the stage for where this project is going to go. The initial project, in terms of the rationale and purpose of the work, we met, myself and Carrie, when I was her professor in a teacher education program. And the photograph that you're looking at right now is the moment when I actually observed her in one of her first practice teaching practicums. In this moment, Carrie is actually teaching a grade 9-10, so that's age 15-16 students, a media arts class, mixed media. And these were students that had really little to no experience in any kind of media arts. And what she was doing was giving a film workshop on the basics of sort of what the students would soon to call old school filmmaking. So not digital filmmaking, but real hands-on filmmaking. And as I was watching her teach, I started thinking about the nature of faculties or schools of education. And what are some of the things that we really insist that new teachers need to internalize about what it is to become a teacher? And I was thinking about how much we say, you need to be a lifelong learner, you need to continue growing and continue developing. And I was thinking about that, what that meant for myself as a teacher of teachers. And so I was thinking, this is such a fascinating class that I'm watching, and Carrie's doing such a fabulous job. What can I actually learn from her in this moment? How can I take this feeling of being inspired by one of my own students and turning it into a lifelong learning experience for myself and for other students as a result? So my thinking deepened into the idea of professors having a responsibility to model the professionalism that they actually wish to instill in their own teacher candidates. We want them to be lifelong learners. How can I realistically demonstrate that I'm also a lifelong learner and show that to my students? It's more than just observing and giving feedback in practicum placements, which is what that initially was in that moment in that photograph. It's about something more. And so this notion of education as hospitality arose for me as I started giving more thought to the process of teacher education. The idea that we don't just deliver curriculum, we don't just deliver a skill set to new teachers, we're not just mentors in the sort of traditional sense, but we are also people that provide an invitation. and an acceptance to those who show up in our classrooms. So in this case, Carrie came to me as a new teacher, but she also came to me as someone who had a background as an independent, skilled filmmaker. And what could I actually figure out about that experience for her that her and I could use together and move forward as a learning experience collaboratively? So I made the decision after watching her teach that day that I was going to invite her to collaborate on a filmmaking workshop in a different context. So, how could we possibly deliver that same feeling, that same creativity, that same new experience to a group of teacher candidates? What did I need to learn about filmmaking? And what did Carrie need to learn about perhaps teaching her peer group? In terms of the context and background, before we get into the actual project, I wanted to just make sure that those that are watching that don't have a background in the arts know what I'm actually referring to when I talk about film. So, film in the context of this project actually refers to the sort of tangible materials, the creation, the performance or projection of celluloid motion pictures. So, oftentimes when I say to my students, what comes to mind when I say the word film? And they immediately go to, the blockbuster that they saw last week that was digitally created for the cinema. But they actually have sort of lost the connection to where the art form came from, which was the actual physical film strip that was used to create those films or motion pictures before digital technology. Film can also refer to a series of still images found on that film strip that, when projected and shown on a screen, actually creates the illusion of moving images. So those of you that are sort of my age and older, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It really is just an optical illusion that causes the audience to perceive continuous motion between separate objects viewed rapidly in succession. In terms of the kind of filmmaking we decided to do in our workshops, and again, it was sometimes called old school, but it was very hands-on and very tangible and very creative, also very tactile. We decided to do something called cameraless film, which sounds, to those who don't know what it is, kind of counterintuitive. How can you make a film without a camera? So essentially what you do is you use directly the kind of film strip that we used, which is called Clear Leader, and we produce images directly on that film stock without actually having to develop or film anything in the traditional sense. Two methods can be used to produce animation this way. The first one starts with a blank film stock, so it's called Clear Leader. It's film that is not developed, and it's just like a clear plastic strip, if you remember what 16 millimeter film strip looks like. The other kind that you can do with cameraless filmmaking is to use an already developed film and actually alter that developed film through manual means. The artist, in this case our participants, could draw, they could paint, they could stamp, or they could even glue or tape objects on the blank film themselves. Or they could use film that had already been developed and they could tint it, they could scratch, they could etch, it could be sanded, or it could be punched. And essentially any tool that the artist finds useful might have been used. In our case, we actually used paint, glitter, glue, natural elements from the outside environment, and even some more unconventional things like nail polish and Sharpies, markers, to actually draw on the 16 millimeter film strip. So the project that we did, we decided to deliver this work to a group of teacher candidates and to see what would happen when Carrie and I collaborated as true equals. So in the film workshops, we actually gave each of the participants, like I said, a strip of 16 millimeter Clear Leader film strip. We cut that film strip into 5-foot lengths. And so in a 5-foot length of Clear Leader film strip, you would have 200 frames of film that you need to fill by hand. Many of the students actually chose Sharpie markers as their medium because it's so fine-tipped. You can use a magnifying glass to actually design each individual film strip section or frame as your work. Then what we did is we took all of those 5-foot sections and we spliced them together using an old school splicing machine for 16 millimeter film, and we created actual films, which we then turned into digital products. After the project was completed, we started thinking about what to do with this experience. Rather than just allowing it to sort of exist, we decided to actually turn it into research and create a bit of a research investigation surrounding our experiences in collaboration and delivering the film workshops to our teacher candidates. So the areas of literature that we looked at, I've just listed them for you on the slide there, so you can take a look if you'd like. And we've listed some of the primary researchers that influenced our thinking. So appreciative inquiry is the framework that we settled on to kind of unpack or debunk our experiences as collaborators. It can be found in education, it's used in health education and adult education. And I do have another slide that talks a little bit about why we chose appreciative inquiry. We also looked at literature that came from the area of collaboration and arts integration. So most of the literature focuses on the idea of a professor collaborating with another professor, or a professor collaborating with a student that is at the graduate level, so a PhD, doctoral, or master's student, or talks about collaboration between a professor and a community-based organization. Very little of the work on collaboration and research these days seems to focus on the idea of a professor collaborating with an undergraduate student. So professors working as collaborators with students that don't really have any research experience or research background. They might be very new to the university environment, but they can be skilled experts in their own right. And so that's the direction that we wanted to look at in terms of thinking about the research moving forward. We also, of course, drew on some literature from filmmaking and specifically photography in the classroom, in arts-based learning and other environments. We're also thinking a little bit about the context or concept of filmmaking as text, so as historical documents, visual documents, interactive ways of understanding, and arts-based research methods and methodologies has also come into play. So we did, like I said, settle on this idea of appreciative inquiry as our conceptual framework. We love the idea, both myself and the student Carrie, that it could focus on the positive. What did we both learn from that experience of collaboration and delivering the film workshops that we want to take forward, that we don't want to disregard, and that we maybe want to duplicate or enhance in some other project moving forward? So appreciative inquiry really builds on those positive experiences to spark positive change by honoring the expertise residing in an organization and its people, essentially by uncovering what works well in that system, and then allowing you to devise ways to expand upon those strengths moving forward. I personally, when I was reading the literature, also found that appreciative inquiry really places a value on the personal, on the positive, on the narrative-rich individual stories that we can investigate. There's an encouragement of learning through active engagement. And appreciative inquiry also emphasizes respect and asks you to pay equal attention or equal voice between participants and other stakeholders. And as the professor in the situation or the researcher, I really felt like that was important to me. I wanted the student that was involved in this work to feel that they had equal input and equal voice. And the other thing we found also with appreciative inquiry is that many of these sort of inquiries use the same kind of 4-step model. We're looking at discovering what works well, dreaming about what we can do with it, designing new projects and new research moving forward, and then delivering those new research or new projects with an enhancement. The methodology and data sources was actually quite straightforward. Because we developed and delivered all of these cameraless workshops, we had a plethora, a huge number of data sources that we could draw on. For the initial research, we decided to narrow it to the following things. So there's a list there in front of you on the screen. At the end of the day, we delivered 6 full 2-hour cameraless film workshops together. 2 workshops were for elementary teacher candidates or primary junior, depending on the words that you use. 2 were for intermediate secondary or secondary teacher candidates. 2 were with an open registration where some of the teacher candidates from previous workshops wanted to do more. So we offered a repeat of some of those workshops. In total, we had approximately 140 teacher candidate participants, and we ended up with 145-foot long 16-millimeter film strips, which we then spliced together into several individual films. At the end of the day, we ended up with 3 resulting abstract films, approximately 4 to 7 minutes long each. And those films were done under a particular theme. So one of the themes that we asked the students to create in their workshop with their film strip was to think about what teacher identity meant to them. So as a new teacher, what can you do with your film strip that shows me your identity as a new educator? The second film centered around the idea of ecological sustainability, nature, bringing nature into the classroom, and how we can think about sustainability in a new way and help our students learn through that method. And then the third film is sort of a random collection of artistic expression. We wanted to give the participants a chance to not be bound by a theme and just to see what they came up with. We interviewed each other. It was sort of a bit of a self-study. And we had discussions between myself as the professor and Carrie as the student artist about our experiences, not only in the creative process, but what does it mean to really collaborate with someone that you wouldn't normally have collaborated with? We also engaged through participant questionnaires and exit surveys when the workshops were delivered. And we had some interviews that we did with self-selected student participants. Some of that is still in progress, but we felt that we had enough information about the personal side of the experience to really move forward with the work. So this brings me to the spot where we talk about preliminary lessons. And there are some lessons here that are arts-based and some that are teacher education-based, and some that we're pursuing at a more broad level in terms of university collaboration. But this is what both myself and Carrie, as the student artist, agreed on. These are the things that we decided were most important that we learned from the experience. Professor-student collaboration in this project really offered a rich, dynamic learning experience or opportunity that would not otherwise have been possible. So in brackets, I've got S/P written, and that means that in the data, both the student and the professor decided that this was something that was important to them. Professor-student collaboration also provides the student with the opportunity to explore a leadership role with their peers. So Carrie really otherwise had not had the opportunity to teach her own peer group as teacher candidates. And that was something that was daunting for her in the beginning, but we worked through it and I helped her through that process and she found it to be very positive. I also really enjoyed seeing her take a leadership role with her peers. And I learned from watching her learning how to teach her peers, which was a really fascinating experience. And then also in the brackets, so it says student, professor, and then PT means that the participants, the actual teacher candidates, also mentioned that they really loved seeing a student in a leadership role in a university classroom. Many of them had not actually felt that they'd seen that before in a meaningful way. Professor-student collaboration also allows the professor to engage in student-led professional development and to enhance curriculum and course content or delivery. I had been teaching integrated arts and teacher education courses at this point for about 8 years when we did this project, 9 years, and I had never been able to teach filmmaking before. And so this was a new thing for me that I would not have otherwise been able to tackle. Professor-student collaboration also demonstrates authentic commitment to lifelong learning on the part of the professor. Now, this is an interesting point because it sounds like I'm saying I did a good job in being a lifelong learner, but in fact, that statement actually came from the student and the participants. They really felt like their professor, in this case, it happened to be me, was walking the talk. They were watching me learn while my students were also learning, and it was very powerful for them to see that that was possible. Professor-student collaboration also builds upon the shared expertise of both professor and student, and it allowed us, in this case, to create a sort of new hybrid approach to teaching an older activity, concept, or idea. Had I decided to just teach basic filmmaking on my own, I may not have been able to do this in a hands-on format. It might have been more conceptual, not as engaging, and if Carrie hadn't been given this opportunity to work as a leader in her own peer group, she may not have had that learning experience otherwise. So we felt, all of us actually felt in this case, that it was a sort of hybridized approach to teaching something old in a new way. Finally, I just have 2 slides left, and I'd just like to mention what's happening with this work now. So at the end of this particular project, when we had done the work, done the analysis, and found those lessons that were useful, well, what happens now? Where does the research go next? And although Carrie is finished her program and will not be continuing with me on this particular research track, this was something that she helped me formulate moving forward before she graduated. So thank you to Carrie for that. So new research questions that we've come up with are, To what extent are professors in arts, education, or other university contexts already collaborating with students? I thought this was a really interesting thing to think about, given that I didn't want to assume that collaboration is not happening. I genuinely believe that collaboration in university undergraduate classrooms is happening, and I want to know what that collaboration really looks like. What elements are enabling or constraining that collaborative approach between professors and students? What are the things that allow it to be something positive? Why are professors prepared or not prepared to take risks in inviting students to be experts in the classroom? What is enabling or constraining that particular process and relationship? And then how are those collaborative teaching partnerships actually being formed between professors and students? In our case, I, as the professor, invited Carrie in as the student to participate in one of my classes. But I think there's a deeper, more complex question there about power and disrupting power dynamics in university settings where we need to set our students up to feel that they have empowerment. They are experts in some regards, and would they feel comfortable approaching a professor? So instead of the professor always setting up the collaborative relationship, could a student actually approach a professor and propose something? And then finally, do particular subject areas, in this case it was the arts, lend themselves more easily to professor-student collaborative teaching and learning approaches than other subject areas? For me, coming from a music and arts background, collaboration is sort of second nature. It's something that you really can't avoid when you're an arts specialist. But if you're a physics professor or a math professor or a history professor, what would that look like for you? Is it a subject area that lends itself well to collaborative processes or not? And that's something we want to investigate. Finally, I'll just note that now that Carrie has graduated and I've moved forward with the research independently, I've actually got a new pilot study that has come out of this work and is being modeled on the things that I learned from the first project. It's called A Comparative Study of Arts-Based Collaborative Teaching and Learning Practices between University Professors and Undergraduate Students in British Columbia, Ontario, and the Maritimes. And those are the three areas of Canada that I'm drawing data from. So British Columbia being on the West Coast, Ontario being somewhere in the middle, and the Maritimes being where I'm living and teaching now on the East Coast. This new full pilot project will take the same approach as the initial filmmaking project, though it may not be filmmaking that is the particular medium or delivery system. It is also going to be an investigation of collaborative teaching and learning practices in education, using appreciative inquiry as a framework. It worked well, and I'd like to continue using it and exploring it. The research sites, as I mentioned, are 6 primarily undergraduate universities from 3 Canadian regions. Like I said, one from the West Coast, one from the middle, and one from the East Coast. Those 3 areas. I will be doing observations, interviews, and mostly through the arts-based lens. And then finally, thinking about longer-term goals for this work. I'm thinking that in the long term, I'd like to create a comparative study between Canada and the UK. UK is not a random selection for me. I actually am a dual citizen with Canada and the UK. And I've traveled to the UK many times. And in fact, my own doctoral work was completed in the UK. And so I wanted to think about this idea of teacher education on a more global scale. Is it collaborative in nature in Canada? And does that also seem like it's present in other places, in other teacher education approaches? So can I create a comparative study, in this case, between Canada and the UK? And then eventually I'd like to expand the study beyond the context of schools of education. And in fact, I didn't note it on the slide, but beyond the context of arts-based education. So what might that look like if we're looking at undergraduate collaboration between professors and students, in other contexts? Last but not least, I've reached the end, and I think I'm at my time limit here. So thank you very much for watching this virtual presentation. I hope that you've enjoyed learning something not only about the arts, about filmmaking, but maybe about collaboration and new approaches to teacher education as well. I would welcome conversations with you. If I'd been there in person, we could have had this conversation over a cup of tea or a drink in the evening. But I would welcome the email from you so that we can start that conversation virtually. Again, I'm Dr. Lisa Mitchell, Assistant Professor, St. Thomas University, School of Education on the East Coast of Canada. And my email is lmitchell@stu.ca. That's stu.ca. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the remainder of the presentations.